Noticed the way his eyes moved to the window when he thought I wasn't looking. Not at the trees, not at the lake, at the property line. I caught it the first time he came to the house, and I never forgot it. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I live on a quarter section of land outside of Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and I've spent my whole life being careful. Careful with money, careful with trust. My late husband Gordon and I built everything we have from nothing. A small veterinary practice he ran out of a converted garage for 11 years before we had enough to build a proper clinic. A modest investment portfolio through our credit union that grew quietly over 3 decades, and the land, 47 acres of mixed forest and meadow that Gordon's father had cleared by hand. Gordon passed 4 years ago this past March, and I have been managing all of it alone since then. I want to say clearly, I am not a wealthy woman in the way people imagine wealthy women. I don't drive a new car. I shop at the co-op, the same as everyone else in this town. But the land is paid for, the clinic sold well when I retired, and the RRSPs have grown into something real. I knew that. Gordon knew that, and apparently my daughter's boyfriend knew that too, far sooner than he should have. My daughter Petra came home from Vancouver in October 2 years ago, just before Thanksgiving. She'd been out there for 6 years, working in healthcare administration, building her career, living her life. I was proud of her every single day. She called every Sunday without fail, even during the years when I could tell she was exhausted, when she'd answer and I'd hear the strain underneath her voice before she covered it with brightness. That's the thing about daughters. They protect their mothers, even when their mothers are the ones who should be doing the protecting. She came home for Thanksgiving, and she brought someone with her. His name was Warren. He was 41 years old, originally from Moncton, and he had the kind of smile that filled a room. Broad, easy, teeth just slightly too white. He shook my hand in the doorway and said, "It is so wonderful to finally meet you. Petra talks about you constantly." His grip was firm. He held eye contact 1 beat longer than felt natural. That first evening, everything was lovely. He helped clear the table without being asked. He asked Gordon's brother about his years working in the fisheries, and actually listened to the answer, which takes either genuine curiosity or excellent training. He complimented the property twice, once during dinner when the sun was cutting across the meadow and the light was genuinely beautiful, and once after, standing on the back porch. "How far does your land go?" he asked me. I told him. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're filing something away. I thought, he's curious, city person not used to this much land. I thought nothing more of it. He came back at Christmas. He and Petra had moved in together by then into her apartment in Vancouver. She seemed happy. She laughed more easily than I'd seen her laugh in years. I watched her watching him across the table, and I recognized something in her face, the particular open quality that comes when you trust someone completely, when you have stopped bracing for anything. I had looked at Gordon that way for 30 years. I wanted that for her. During that Christmas visit, Warren asked about the land again. This time more specifically. He'd done some looking, he said. Just curious, he said. And he mentioned the assessed value of agricultural property in Antigonish County. He mentioned it casually, the way you'd mention the weather. I changed the subject. He let me. In February, he called me directly. Not Petra, me. He said he'd been thinking about my situation as a widow living alone on a large property, and had I ever considered consolidating the land and the investment accounts into a single trust structure. He knew a financial planner in Halifax who specialized in estate management for single women in retirement. He could arrange an introduction. I said I already had an accountant and a financial advisor whom I'd worked with for 20 years. Thank you. He said he understood, but this person was really exceptional, very experienced with rural properties specifically. I said no. He said, Of course, of course. Just wanted to make sure you had options. Petra worries about you, you know. We both do. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after I hung up. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I think it matters. I did not call Petra. I did not want to put her in the middle of something that was still only a feeling, a collection of small things that individually meant nothing but together felt like a shape I recognized. I called my accountant instead, a woman named Gail, who has been doing my taxes since 1998 and who has about as much tolerance for nonsense as the province of Nova Scotia itself. I told her what Warren had said. I told her about the questions at Thanksgiving, at Christmas. I told her about the feeling. Gail was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do not change a single document. Do not sign anything. Do not introduce him to anyone who handles your money, and watch what he does next." What he did next was come for a visit alone, without Petra, in April. He said he was attending a conference in Halifax and thought he'd drive up to see me, that Petra had been so busy with a project at work and sent her love. He arrived with a bottle of Nova Scotia ice wine and a folder. The folder contained information about power of attorney. He framed it as concern. He said that what kept him up at night, what kept Petra up at night, he said, though I later confirmed she knew nothing about this visit, was the thought of me alone on the property with no one designated to manage my affairs if something happened. He had printed information from the Nova Scotia Public Trustee website. He had a list of questions to ask a lawyer. He had, at the back of the folder, a draft POA document naming himself as my attorney. My attorney, not Petra, him. I kept my face very still. I have been a veterinarian for 31 years, and I have learned to keep my face still when I need to not let the animal sense alarm. I took the folder. I said I would read through it. I poured us each a cup of tea, and I asked him about his conference. He relaxed immediately. That told me everything. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and I read the document carefully. It was a real document, properly formatted under Nova Scotia's Powers of Attorney Act. It was not a crude forgery or a scam printout. This was something that had been prepared. I thought about Gordon. I thought about 47 acres and 30 years of quiet, careful work, and I made a decision. I drove to Gail's office the next morning. Then I drove to my lawyer's office. Then I called my investment advisor and had the accounts moved to a structure that required two-person authorization for any significant changes. I documented every contact I'd had with Warren, dates, what was said, how it was framed. I wrote it all down while it was fresh. Then I did something that felt harder than any of that. I hired a private investigator in Halifax, a woman named Rose, who had 30 years of experience and charged $300 a day and was worth every cent. What Rose found over the following 6 weeks was this. Warren had been involved with an older woman in Moncton 7 years earlier, a widow in her 70s named Edna. Edna had signed over power of attorney to Warren after 18 months of courtship. Within 2 years, approximately $240,000 had moved through her accounts into investment vehicles Warren controlled. By the time Edna's son discovered what had happened, Warren had ended the relationship and the money was structured in ways that made legal recovery nearly impossible. Edna did not press charges. She was embarrassed. She was tired. She wanted it to be over. He had done this before. I held that report in my hands and I thought about Edna, whoever she was, sitting somewhere in Moncton having lost not just the money but the belief in herself that comes from being deceived by someone you trusted. I thought about how many women like Edna there were, how many there had been, and I thought about my daughter, who was living with this man who was in love with him, who looked at him the way I had looked at Gordon. Telling Petra was the hardest thing I've ever done, not because I was afraid she wouldn't believe me, but because I knew exactly what it would cost her. I had the documents from Rose. I had my own records. I drove to Vancouver in May. I did not call ahead. I arrived at their building on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat in the lobby, and I texted Petra, "I'm downstairs. I need an hour with you. Please come down alone." She came down in 7 minutes. She saw my face, and she said, "Mom, what happened?" I said, "Nothing happened to me, but I need to show you something." We sat in a coffee shop around the corner, and I laid everything out. I did not editorialize. I did not tell her what to feel. I put Rose's report on the table and my own documentation and the draft POA document with Warren's name on it. I watched her read it. I watched her face go through things I cannot describe: disbelief, recognition, grief, something cold and quiet settling in behind her eyes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you'd been having some memory issues. He mentioned it twice this year. He said he was worried about you managing on your own." There it was. He had been laying groundwork with her too, quietly, gently, the way you lay groundwork. Not accusations, just concern, just loving concern from a man who cared so much about her mother. Petra wiped her eyes once, quickly, like she was annoyed at herself for crying. Then she looked at me and said, "What do we do?" I told her I thought that was up to her, that whatever she decided, I had already protected myself legally and financially, and she did not need to do anything on my behalf, that I had come because she deserved to know, not because I needed her to act. She moved out of their apartment 3 weeks later, while Warren was at work. She took her car and her clothes and a box of books, and she left the ice wine on the counter. She told me this on the phone. I was standing in my kitchen, looking out at the back meadow, the same meadow Warren had stared at on that first Thanksgiving evening, and I thought about Gordon and the years we'd spent making something real, and I felt something settle in my chest that had not been settled in a long time. I thought it was over. I thought we were done. Warren did not take it quietly. He called Petra every day for 2 weeks. He was confused, then hurt, then angry. He denied everything about Edna, said it was a misunderstanding, a family dispute that had been distorted into something it wasn't. He said I was a paranoid, controlling woman who had never wanted Petra to have a life of her own. He said a lot of things. Then he called me. He called me on a Sunday morning in June, early enough that I was still in my housecoat. His voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Not the warm conference voice, not the folder on the table voice, just flat and cold and honest for the first time. He said, "You've destroyed something beautiful because you're an old woman who doesn't trust anyone. I hope it was worth it." I said, "I've destroyed nothing, and I want you to know that everything you said to Petra about my memory, and every document you prepared, and every phone call you made to my financial contacts, I have it all. If you contact my daughter again, or me, I will take it to the RCMP and I will make it public." He hung up. He has not called since. Petra came home for the long weekend in August. We drove out along the Northumberland shore and stopped at a fish and chip place in Pictou and ate out of the paper wrapping on the hood of the car, looking at the water. She said very little about Warren. She said she kept replaying small moments. The way he'd mentioned my memory, the particular gentleness of it, how she'd felt grateful to him for worrying about me. She said the thing that made her feel stupidest was not that she hadn't seen it, but that she had seen the shape of something and had decided to call it love instead of what it was. I told her that is what people like Warren count on, not stupidity, the opposite, the fact that decent people extend decency, that is the whole mechanism. She nodded and ate a chip and looked at the water. Last fall, I had the estate documents finalized properly, with my lawyer and Gail and my investment advisor all present. The land is in a trust. The accounts require co-authorization. Petra has POA, structured clearly with independent oversight built in. Everything Gordon and I built is held properly now, with the right protections and the right people. The 47 acres are still there. The meadow still catches the late afternoon light the same way it did that first Thanksgiving. The clinic may be sold, but the memory of building it is not going anywhere. Some mornings I walk the property line the way Gordon used to, out past the woodpile, across the low field, up to where the land meets the tree line and the whole county opens out to the east. I think about Edna in Moncton. I think about how many women like her there are. Women who trusted someone and lost something they spent a life building, who felt too ashamed to make noise about it. I made noise. And if this reaches anyone who recognizes something in this story, a question asked one too many times, a concern expressed just a little too smoothly, a folder that appeared on your kitchen table, I want you to know that your instincts are not paranoia. Call your accountant, call a lawyer, write it down while it's fresh. That's what I did. And everything I love is still exactly where it should be. I keep thinking about the folder, the way he set it on my kitchen table like it was a favor, the way he poured the tea first, that detail still gets me, before sliding it across. There was a kind of patience in that gesture that I've turned over many times since. It wasn't impulsive, it was practiced. What Warren did had a logic to it, and understanding that logic is, I think, what kept me from being Edna. Not luck, not some special sharpness I was born with. I was careful because Gordon taught me to be careful, because Gail had been telling me for 20 years to trust the numbers and the documents and not the charm. That kind of clarity doesn't arrive on its own. It gets built, slowly, the same way you build anything worth keeping. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to protect yourself from someone like him. Not just legally. That part, once I knew what I was dealing with, was manageable. What I mean is the internal thing, the willingness to sit with an uncomfortable feeling and not talk yourself out of it. I had a feeling the first evening Warren stood on my back porch, looking at the property line. I had a feeling the second time he mentioned the land value at Christmas dinner. And both times I found a reason to let it go, to be fair, to extend the benefit of the doubt, which is a decent instinct generally, but decency towards someone who is counting on your decency is something else entirely. What I had to learn, or maybe remember, is that paying attention to something is not the same as accusing someone. Writing down what was said and when is not paranoia. Calling Gail is not an overreaction. These are just things a person with good judgment does when the situation asks for it. My mother used to say that being wise doesn't mean you stop trusting people. It means you know the difference between trust that's been earned and trust that's being manufactured. I didn't fully understand that until this year. Petra is the one I think about most, not with worry anymore, but with a kind of quiet admiration. She had built a life with this man. She had let herself be fully in it, and when I sat across from her in that coffee shop in Vancouver and put the folder on the table, she read every page, asked 2 careful questions, and then said, "What do we do?" Not denial, not collapse, just what do we do? That kind of steadiness under that kind of pain. I didn't teach her that. She built it herself. Somewhere along the way in all the years of hard work and honest living that Warren had tried to position as vulnerability. The thing about people who operate the way Warren operates is that they are specifically looking for what you've built, not the flashy things, the real things. The 47 acres cleared by hand, the accounts grown over 30 years of small decisions. They look for the proof that someone has lived carefully and well, and they call it an opportunity. I don't want to be the kind of person who stops trusting. I don't want to walk the property line every morning with suspicion instead of gratitude. What I want, what I'm working toward, is to hold both things at once, the openness and the judgment, the warmth and the documentation. Gordon managed it. Gail manages it. Petra, I think, is learning to manage it now. The land is still here, the meadow still catches the light, and I am still, at 63, a person who is capable of protecting what she loves, not by closing herself off, but by knowing exactly what she has and refusing to pretend otherwise.